This wasn't just any poker game. This was the moment that would change everything for three women who had been treated like property their entire lives. And the man who won them? He was about to do something that would shock an entire town and prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the shadows of the Wild West. Before we dive into this incredible story, I need to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below, because these tales of courage and compassion have traveled across the globe, and I love seeing how far they reach. The dust hung thick in the air that October morning, as if the very earth was holding its breath. In the frontier town of Cedar Falls, nothing moved except the tumbleweeds and the occasional horse stamping impatiently at a hitching post. The streets were empty, save for a few early risers heading to the general store or the blacksmith shop. But inside Murphy's saloon, something was happening that would be talked about for generations. The saloon doors creaked open as Samuel Hayes stepped inside, his boots echoing against the worn wooden floors. Sam wasn't your typical gambler. At 38, he was a man who'd seen enough of life to know when something was wrong, and enough of death to value what was right. His weathered hands bore the calluses of honest work, not the soft palms of a card sharp. He owned a modest cattle ranch about 10 miles outside town. Nothing fancy, but it was his own. Sam had only come to town for supplies: feed for his horses, nails for his fence, maybe a hot meal that he didn't have to cook himself. He hadn't planned on walking into the middle of what could only be described as human misery dressed up as entertainment. At the far end of the saloon, a crowd had gathered around a makeshift stage built from wooden crates and old planks. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the stench of unwashed bodies pressed too close together. Men laughed and shouted, their voices carrying the ugly edge that comes when people forget their humanity. And there, standing center stage like some twisted ringmaster, was Marcus Dalton. Everyone knew Marcus. He was the kind of man who collected debts and grudges with equal enthusiasm, who saw opportunity in other people's desperation. His coat was stained with whiskey, and his eyes held the hollow gleam of a man who'd sold his soul so many times he'd forgotten what it felt like to own it. But it wasn't Marcus that made Sam's blood run cold. It was what stood beside him. 3 young women, bound at the wrists, their eyes cast down in shame and exhaustion. They couldn't have been more than 25 years old, and their traditional Chinese clothing marked them as foreigners in a land that wasn't always kind to outsiders. The eldest stood with her back straight despite everything, defiance flickering in her dark eyes like embers that refused to die. The middle sister kept her gaze fixed on the floor, her shoulders trembling with barely contained emotion. The youngest swayed slightly on her feet, humming something soft and broken under her breath. Marcus's voice cut through the crowd like a rusty blade. "Gentlemen, what we have here is a rare opportunity. 3 exotic beauties, fresh from the Orient, perfect for cooking, cleaning, and whatever other services a man might require." The crowd erupted in crude laughter and shouted bids. Sam felt his stomach turn. He'd seen a lot of ugly things in his 38 years, but this was something different. This was evil dressed up as commerce, cruelty masquerading as business. The bidding started low, but it climbed quickly. $10, $15, $25. The men around the stage pressed closer, their faces flushed with excitement and alcohol. They called out numbers like they were bidding on livestock, not human beings. Sam watched in horror as respectable townspeople, men he'd shared drinks with, men whose children played in the same streets, transformed into something monstrous. The baker who made bread for Sunday church services, the bank clerk who always tipped his hat to ladies, the deputy sheriff who was supposed to protect people like these 3 women. Where were the voices of reason? Where were the men who would stand up and say this was wrong? As the bidding reached $40, Sam realized with growing dread that no one was coming to save them. No one was going to step forward and stop this travesty. The law, the church, the community, they were all standing by and letting it happen. The eldest sister raised her head then, and her eyes swept across the crowd. When her gaze met Sam's, he saw something that hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't just fear or desperation. It was a silent plea that said, "Please don't let us disappear into this darkness." In that moment, Sam understood something that would change the course of his life forever. Sometimes a man doesn't choose to be a hero. Sometimes heroism chooses him, and all he can do is decide whether he's worthy of it. The bidding had reached $50 when Sam heard his own voice cutting through the noise. $100. The saloon fell silent. Every head turned toward him, and Sam could feel the weight of their stares. Marcus Dalton's eyes narrowed as he tried to place this unexpected bidder. "Did I hear correctly, friend? $100 for the lot?" Sam nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "That's right." The crowd murmured with excitement. This was more money than most of them saw in a month. Marcus grinned, revealing teeth stained yellow with tobacco. "Well now, that's a serious bid. Anyone care to match it?" Sam held his breath. $100 was nearly everything he had saved. It represented months of careful budgeting, of doing without luxuries, of planning for a future that suddenly seemed very uncertain. But as he looked at those three women, as he saw the spark of hope that flickered in the eldest sister's eyes, he knew he'd pay twice that amount if he had to. The silence stretched on. Finally, Marcus slammed his hand down on the makeshift podium. "Sold to the gentleman in the brown vest." The crowd began to disperse, disappointed that the entertainment was over. Sam made his way through the throng of bodies, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. When he reached the stage, Marcus was already counting the bills Sam had placed in his greedy palm. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Hayes." "Samuel Hayes." "Well, Mr. Hayes, they're all yours now. Fair warning, though, the little one's been acting strange since we picked them up. Might be touched in the head." Sam looked at the youngest sister, who was still humming that haunting melody. Her eyes were distant, but not vacant. She was somewhere else, somewhere safe, and Sam envied her that escape. "Where did they come from?" Sam asked. Marcus shrugged. "Won them in a card game from a Chinese merchant who got in over his head. Been trying to recoup my investment ever since." Won them, like they were poker chips or cattle. Sam felt his jaw clench, but he kept his voice steady. "I'll need the paperwork." "What paperwork? You bought them, they're yours. Simple as that." But it wasn't simple. Nothing about this was simple. As Sam looked at the three women who now, legally and morally, were his responsibility, he realized that the easy part was over. The hard part, the part that would define what kind of man he really was just beginning. The three women stood there like statues carved from different kinds of sorrow, each one carrying pain in her own way. Sam had never felt the weight of responsibility quite like this before. He'd bought cattle, horses, land, but never human beings. The very thought made his skin crawl, even though he knew his intentions were nothing like the other men in that saloon. "Come on," he said gently, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let's get out of here." The eldest sister, the one with fire still burning in her dark eyes, looked at him with suspicion. She spoke in rapid Chinese to her sisters, and though Sam couldn't understand the words, he could hear the caution in her tone. The middle sister nodded nervously, while the youngest just kept humming, her gaze fixed on something only she could see. Sam led them outside into the harsh afternoon sun. His wagon was hitched to two sturdy horses at the far end of the street, and he could feel every eye in Cedar Falls watching their strange procession. Curtains twitched in windows. Men paused in their conversations to stare. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts. The walk to his wagon felt like the longest 100 yards of Sam's life. With each step, he could hear the whispers starting behind them. By tomorrow, the whole town would be buzzing with speculation about what Samuel Hayes planned to do with his expensive purchase. When they reached the wagon, Sam gestured for the women to climb into the back. He'd lined it with hay and old blankets for the supplies he'd planned to buy, but now it would have to serve as transportation for three people whose lives had just taken an unimaginable turn. The eldest sister helped her younger siblings into the wagon bed, then turned to face Sam. She spoke in broken English, her accent thick but her meaning clear. You buy us. What you want? The question hit Sam like a punch to the gut. What did he want? He'd acted on instinct, on a moral impulse that he couldn't ignore, but he hadn't thought beyond that moment in the saloon. Now he had 3 human beings depending on him, and he had no idea what came next. I want you to be safe, he said finally. That's all. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for deception or hidden motives. Sam tried to keep his expression open and honest, though inside he was anything but calm. You have wife? She asked. No. No wife. Other women? No. Her eyes narrowed. Then why? It was a fair question, and Sam wished he had a better answer. Because it was wrong, he said. What was happening in there was wrong, and somebody had to stop it. The woman translated for her sisters. The youngest one, the one Marcus had said might be touched in the head, looked directly at Sam for the first time. Her humming stopped, and when she spoke, her voice was crystal clear. He has kind eyes, she said in English that was much better than her older sister's. Like our father had. Sam felt something twist in his chest. These women had lost their father, had been torn from everything they knew, and somehow ended up as gambling stakes in a frontier saloon. The injustice of it made his hands shake with anger. The ride to his ranch was quiet except for the creaking of wagon wheels and the steady clip-clop of horse hooves on the dusty trail. Sam found himself glancing back at his passengers every few minutes, still hardly believing what he'd done. $100 was more money than most people in Cedar Falls saw in 6 months. It represented his entire savings, his security, his plans for expanding the ranch. But every time doubt crept into his mind, he remembered the look in that eldest sister's eyes when she'd silently pleaded with him across that crowded saloon. Some things were worth more than money. Some things were worth more than security. His ranch came into view as the sun began to sink toward the western horizon. It wasn't much to look at, just a simple wooden house with a wraparound porch, a barn that had seen better days, and a corral where his horses grazed peacefully. But it was honest work, built with his own hands, and it represented everything he'd ever wanted from life. Now he was about to share it with 3 strangers who had every reason to distrust him. Sam helped the women down from the wagon, noting how the eldest sister kept herself between him and her younger siblings. Smart. She was protecting them the only way she knew how. This is my home, Sam said, gesturing toward the house. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. The 3 sisters stood close together, taking in their surroundings with the wariness of wild animals in unfamiliar territory. The youngest had started humming again, that same haunting melody that seemed to carry all the sadness in the world. You have names? Sam asked. The eldest sister hesitated, then nodded. I am Li Mei, she said, pointing to herself. She gestured toward the middle sister. This is Li Hua. Then toward the youngest. Li Xiu. Li Mei, Li Hua, Li Xiu, Sam repeated carefully, trying to get the pronunciation right. I'm Sam, Samuel Hayes. Li Mei nodded but didn't smile. What you want us to do? Again, that question. Sam ran a hand through his hair, suddenly feeling the weight of the decision he'd made. I don't want you to do anything, he said. I want you to rest, to eat, to feel safe. Li Hua spoke rapidly in Chinese, her voice rising with what sounded like panic. Li Mei responded in soothing tones, but Sam could see the tension in all 3 women. She asks if you will hurt us, Li Mei explained. If you will, use us. Sam felt sick. Of course they would think that, after what they'd been through, after being sold like property. Why would they expect anything different? No, he said firmly. I will never hurt you. I will never force you to do anything you don't want to do. You have my word. Li Mei translated, and he saw some of the tension leave Li Hua's shoulders. Li Xiu stopped humming and looked at him again with those clear, intelligent eyes. Why should we believe you? Li Xiu asked. Every man says he is different. Every man says he is kind. Until he is not. The pain in her voice told Sam everything he needed to know about what these women had endured before ending up in Marcus Dalton's clutches. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and he had to take a deep breath before he could trust himself to speak. "Because I'm going to prove it to you," he said. "Not with words, but with actions. Every single day." The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sam's horses nickered softly in the corral, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. It was peaceful here, far from the noise and corruption of town. For the first time since he'd walked into Murphy's saloon, Sam felt like maybe he'd done the right thing. "Come on," he said gently. "Let me show you inside." The house felt different with 3 women inside it. Sam had lived alone for so long that he'd forgotten how empty silence could sound until it was broken by the soft whisper of unfamiliar voices speaking in a language he didn't understand. He showed them through the modest rooms, pointing out the kitchen, the sitting area, the spare bedrooms that hadn't seen use in years. Lee May walked with careful steps, her eyes cataloging every corner, every window, every potential escape route. She was thinking like someone who'd learned that safety was temporary, and trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Li Hua stayed close to her older sister's shadow, her hands clasped so tightly together that her knuckles had gone white. Li Shu drifted through the rooms like a ghost, touching things with gentle fingers, a wooden chair, a faded curtain, a book left open on a side table. "The bedrooms are upstairs," Sam said, leading them to a narrow staircase. "You can choose whichever ones you like. There are 3 of them, so you'll each have your own space." Li Mei translated for her sisters, and Sam caught the surprise in their voices. Their own rooms, privacy, space to breathe without someone watching their every move. The upstairs hallway was dim in the fading light, but Sam lit an oil lamp that cast dancing shadows on the wooden walls. He opened the first door to reveal a small but clean room with a single bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the prairie. "This one has the best view of the sunrise," he said. Li Shu stepped into the room and walked straight to the window. She pressed her palm against the glass and stood there for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the western sky. When she turned back to face them, there were tears in her eyes. "I can see the stars from here," she whispered. "At home, before everything changed, I used to watch the stars with my father. He taught me their names." Sam felt something crack open in his chest. This wasn't just about rescuing 3 women from a terrible fate. This was about 3 people who'd lost everything, who'd been torn away from a life that had meaning and love, and all the small comforts that made existence bearable. Li Hua chose the middle room, perhaps because it was the smallest, the most hidden. Li Mei took the room closest to the stairs, positioning herself between her sisters and any potential threat that might come up from below, always protecting, always vigilant. Back downstairs, Sam busied himself in the kitchen while the women explored their new surroundings. He wasn't much of a cook, but he could manage basic meals. Tonight he decided on something simple: bread, cheese, and the last of the preserves his neighbor Mrs. Patterson had given him before the harvest. When he called them for supper, they approached the table like deer approaching a waterhole, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Sam had set 4 places, but he noticed Li Mei hesitate when she saw that he expected to eat with them. "In my country," she said carefully, "women do not eat with men they do not know." Sam nodded and picked up his plate. "Then I'll eat on the porch. Take your time." He was halfway to the door when Li Shu's voice stopped him. "Wait!" She looked at her sisters and spoke rapidly in Chinese. Li Mei frowned and shook her head, but Li Shu continued talking, her voice growing stronger. Finally, Li Mei sighed and nodded. "My sister says you have shown us kindness. She says we should show you respect in return. You may eat with us, but you must sit there." Li Mei pointed to the chair farthest from where they'd chosen to sit. "And you must not look at us while we eat." Sam took his assigned seat and kept his eyes fixed on his plate. The meal was quiet except for the soft sounds of eating and the occasional murmur of Chinese between the sisters. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It felt like the beginning of something, fragile as a soap bubble but real nonetheless. After supper, Sam cleared the dishes while the women sat in the parlor. Through the doorway, he could see Li Hua examining his small collection of books, running her fingers over the leather bindings. Li Shu had found his old guitar in the corner and was plucking the strings softly, not playing a melody but just listening to the sounds. "You read English?" Sam asked Li Hua. She looked up, startled to be addressed directly. "Little bit," she said. "My father, he teach us. He say important to know language of business." "What kind of business was your father in?" Li Mei answered before her sister could speak. "He was merchant, silk, tea, beautiful things, until the war came and soldiers took everything." Sam didn't press for more details. The pain in Li Mei's voice told him everything he needed to know about how they'd ended up so far from home, so far from the life they'd known. As the evening wore on, the women began to relax slightly. Li Shu found a simple melody on the guitar, something sad and beautiful that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her memory. Li Hua discovered that Sam's books included a collection of poetry, and she read aloud in halting English, translating some passages into Chinese for her sisters. Li Mei remained watchful, but Sam noticed her shoulders weren't quite so rigid. Her hands weren't quite so ready to grab her sisters and run. When it came time for bed, Sam made sure they knew where everything was. Clean water for washing, extra blankets if they got cold, the chamber pot in each room. He showed them how to bar their doors from the inside, metal brackets he'd installed years ago when he'd worried about bandits. "You lock your doors," he said. "I won't disturb you. In the morning, when you're ready, come down for breakfast. If you're not ready, that's fine too. There's no hurry for anything." Li Mei studied his face in the lamplight. "You are strange man, Samuel Hayes. How so? You spend all your money on women you do not know. You give us food, beds, safety. You ask for nothing. This is not how men behave." Sam thought about that for a moment. Maybe it's how they should behave. After the women had gone upstairs and he'd heard the soft sound of door bars sliding into place, Sam sat alone in his parlor with a cup of coffee and tried to make sense of what he'd done. $100. His entire savings. Gone in a moment of moral impulse that he still couldn't fully explain. But as he sat there in the quiet of his house, listening to the soft sounds of 3 people settling into sleep above him, he realized something that surprised him. He wasn't sorry. Scared, yes. Uncertain about the future, absolutely. But not sorry. For the first time in years, his house felt alive. The next morning, Sam woke before dawn, as was his habit. He dressed quietly and went outside to tend to his horses and check the fence line where his small herd of cattle grazed. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers from the prairie beyond his property. When he came back to the house, he found Li Shu sitting on the front porch, wrapped in one of the blankets from her room. She was watching the sun rise over the eastern hills, her face peaceful in a way he hadn't seen the night before. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "I sleep, but I wake early. Always, since we leave China. Bad dreams." Sam settled into the chair beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. "You want to talk about them?" "No, but thank you for asking." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "In China, I was teacher. I teach children to read, to write, to think. My father, he was proud. He say education is gift that no one can steal. But they stole everything else." Li Shu nodded. "Everything. Our home, our business, our father. They kill him because he will not tell them where he hide the money." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Sam could hear the carefully controlled pain underneath. "I'm sorry. After that, we have nothing. No family, no money, no place to go. Men come, they say they help us get to America, find work, find safety. But they lie. They sell us like— She searched for the word. Like cattle. Yes, like cattle. She was quiet for a moment, watching a hawk circle high overhead. You know what is strange thing? What's that? Yesterday, when you buy us, I think maybe this is end. Maybe this man will be worst of all because he pays so much money. But then I look in your eyes, and I see something I not see in long time. What did you see? Li Shu turned to look at him directly. I see man who is ashamed, not ashamed of us, but ashamed of what happening to us. Most men, they look at us and see things they can use. You look at us and see people who need help. Sam felt heat rise in his cheeks. I just did what anyone should have done. No, Li Shu said firmly. Most people, they walk away. They say is not their problem. They say is not their fault. But you stay. You pay money you cannot afford. You bring us to your home and ask for nothing. She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from any of the sisters. My father, he would like you, I think. The front door opened and Li Mei appeared, already dressed and alert. She spoke quickly to Li Shu in Chinese, her tone slightly scolding. Li Shu responded calmly, and Sam caught his name in the conversation. My sister worries I talk too much to stranger, Li Shu explained. She say is not safe to trust so quickly. Your sister is smart, Sam said. She's trying to protect you. Li Mei's expression softened slightly at his words. She'd understood more English than she'd let on. You have work to do today? Li Mei asked. Some. Need to fix a section of fence, check on the cattle. Nothing that can't wait if you need anything. We do not need anything. We can take care of ourselves. There was pride in her voice, and Sam recognized it. The pride of someone who'd been forced to depend on others and hated every moment of it. I'm sure you can, he said, but the offer stands if you change your mind. Li Hua appeared in the doorway then, her hair neatly braided and her clothes smoothed as much as possible. She looked like she'd slept poorly, dark circles under her eyes and a nervous energy that made her hands flutter like trapped birds. Sam stood up. I'll get breakfast started. Nothing fancy, just eggs and biscuits if that's all right. He cooked while the women sat at the kitchen table, speaking in low voices in Chinese. Occasionally, one of them would glance his way, and he got the impression they were discussing him, trying to figure out what kind of man he really was and what his true intentions might be. Fair enough. If he were in their position, he'd be doing the same thing. After breakfast, Sam excused himself to work on the fence. It was a good excuse to give them space, to let them explore their new surroundings without feeling watched. But as he worked, stretching new wire between wooden posts, he found himself glancing back toward the house more often than necessary. Around midday, Li Hua appeared at the edge of the pasture where he was working. She approached hesitantly, like she was ready to run if he made any sudden movements. Excuse me, she said in careful English. I find something in house. I think maybe it belonged to you. She held out a small wooden carving, a horse in mid-gallop that Sam had made during a particularly long winter several years back. He'd forgotten it was even in the house. You made this? She asked. Sam nodded, wiping his hands on his pants before taking the carving. Just something to pass the time. Winter gets long out here. Li Hua studied his face. Is beautiful. You have great skill. Thank you. She hesitated, then said, In China, my father, he also carve. He make animals, birds, dragons. Very beautiful work. Her voice grew soft with memory. I watch him when I was little girl. He teach me little bit, but I not have his gift. Sam held out the carving. Keep it. If it reminds you of your father, then it belongs with you. Li Hua's eyes widened. I cannot. Is yours. I made it, but that doesn't mean I have to keep it. Sometimes the best gifts are the ones we give away. She took the wooden horse with careful hands, cradling it like it was made of spun glass. Thank you, she whispered. You are a very kind man. As she walked back toward the house, Sam realized something had shifted. The ice was beginning to thaw. And for the first time since he'd made his impulsive decision in Murphy's saloon, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right.